Welcome to the Clinical File. I'm John Cordray, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Rex Heuermann case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes, I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. My analysis is based on my speculations, not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. How does a man manage to live a quiet suburban life as a successful architect, while allegedly harboring the most violent sexual fantasies for over 30 years? What kind of psychological structure is required to maintain a professional career in Manhattan and a family, simultaneously planning the disposal of human beings with the precision of a blueprint? Is it possible for a human being to truly separate their consciousness into two distinct, overlapping realities? Or are the cracks always visible if you know where to look? We're looking at the case of Rex Heuermann, a man whose life appears to be a study in psychology of compartmentalization and the terrifying capacity for a high-functioning psychopathy. As a counselor, I often look for the early seeds of behavior, and while much of Heuermann's early life remains a subject of intense investigation, we see a pattern of early instability and isolation. Heuermann lost his father at the age of 12, a pivotal developmental stage where a young male is seeking a model for emotional regulation and identity. Reports from former classmates describe him as a solitary figure, sometimes volatile, who was often teased or isolated. This lack of social integration during the formative years can lead to the development of a rich and sometimes dark internal fantasy life as a coping mechanism for social rejection. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand how a planning document found on a digital hard drive serves as the ultimate window into a mind obsessed with control. We'll explore how his professional life as an architect wasn't just a job, but a psychological framework for his alleged crimes. The story of the investigation truly broke open on July 13, 2023, but the roots of this psychological profile go back to the early 1990s. On June 6, 2024, and later in December 2024, the scope of this case expanded significantly when Heuermann was charged with the murders of Sandra, Jessica, and Valerie. These charges pushed the timeline of his alleged activity back to 1993, suggesting a predatory pattern that spanned 3 decades. One of the most jarring psychological red flags in this case is the HK 2002-04 document recovered from his computer. This wasn't just a list. It was a methodical blueprint for murder, categorized with labels like body prep, pre-prep, and post-event. From a clinical perspective, this indicates a profound need for cognitive structure to manage overwhelming and violent impulses. Can a person truly feel safe only when they have absolute documented control over the life and death of another human being? The document even included reminders to get good sleep before the hunt and have a story set, showing a high level of executive functioning used to facilitate predatory behavior. This suggests that the perpetrator did not experience a break from reality, but rather a highly organized integration of violence into his schedule. His career as an architect in Midtown Manhattan required him to navigate complex building codes and rigid city regulations. Psychologically, we might see this as a displacement of the need for his order, where the same brain that mastered architectural blueprints was used to master the logistics of disposal. Neighbors described him as a man who would glare at them or swing an axe in his front yard, appearing menacing to some while ordinary to others. This duality is a classic indicator of a mask of sanity, where the individual maintains a superficial social veneer, while the inner world is driven by an entirely different motives. Does the act of maintaining a dilapidated, cluttered home while working in a pristine office reflect an internal fragmentation of the self? In 2025, a judge ruled that Heuermann would face a single trial for all 7 murders, a decision that the defense fought because the MO varied over the years. However, from a behavioral standpoint, serial offenders often evolve their methods as they learn what works and what increases their sense of power. The transition from dismembering victims in the early 1990s to the Gilgore 4 victims found wrapped in burlap suggests a shift in the psychological ritual. The use of burlap is a specific choice. It's a utilitarian coarse material that reflects a total dehumanization of the victim. In my analysis, this choice of material suggests the perpetrator viewed these women not as people, but as projects to be completed and filed away. Why does a predator choose to return to the same geographical dumping ground for decades? And what does it say about the need for a comfort zone? The proximity of the dump sites to his home and his commute suggests a psychological anchoring where the perpetrator feels a sense of ownership over the landscape. Investigators found over 280 firearms in the walk-in vault in his basement, another massive indicator of an obsession with power and potential protection against a perceived hostile world. This arsenal mental health red flag often points to a deep-seated insecurity that is overcompensated for by the acquisition of lethal tools. His family, including his wife and his children, were reportedly out of town during the windows of time when the murders occurred. This indicates a high degree of operational security, a psychological trait where the individual is acutely aware of the boundaries between their 2 lives. The fact that his family's DNA, specifically hair from his wife and daughter that was found on the victims' bodies, it suggests a transference of his domestic life into his crime scenes. Is it possible for a perpetrator to unconsciously bring his family into his crimes as a way to bridge the gap between his 2 identities? His daughter recently stated in a 2025 documentary that she now believes her father is most likely guilty. The psychological impact on the family is a secondary tragedy, as they must reconcile the dependable father figure with the demon described by the prosecutors. Heuermann's internet search history revealed an obsession with the progress of the Gilgore Beach investigation and the victims themselves. Clinically, this is known as trolling, where the offender relives the crime by consuming the media coverage and the pain of the families. It provides a secondary high and a sense of intellectual superiority over the authorities who, for years, were unable to find him. How does the ego of a high-functioning professional handle the secret knowledge that they are smarter than the police for 30 years? The use of burner phones and the taunting calls made to the sister of the victim in 2009 are significant behavioral markers. These calls were not just about the crime. They were about the psychological torture of the survivors, demonstrating a total lack of empathy and a desire for sadistic control. The caller was described as calm and taunting, which aligns with the profile of someone who feels completely detached from the suffering of others. This detachment is the core component of the dark triad of personality traits. As we move closer to the trial, which is set to begin in January 2026, the mountain of evidence continues to grow. DNA from a discarded pizza crust in 2023 was the key that unlocked the genetic door, matching hair found on the burlap of the victims. This clue brings the story full circle. The man who was so meticulous in his planning document was eventually undone by a simple piece of trash. It shows that no matter how structured a double life is, the human element, the leakage of DNA and behavior, cannot be fully controlled. The psychological weight of this case lies in the realization that monsters don't always hide in the woods or under your bed. Sometimes they sit next to you on the train. Heuermann's ability to function in society while allegedly committing these acts challenges our understanding of human nature and mental health. Okay, so this case spans many decades, and now it's coming to light. There's a lot of new information about this case. You may recognize the Gilmore 4 with the beach and the serial killer. That was Rex. Rex was arrested for that. And he was very methodical of living two separate lives as a professional architect, a dad, a husband, and a killer. And that's what a psychopath can do. They can compartmentalize and live two separate lives. They can look like a nice person on the outside, but on the inside, they're harboring very malicious intent. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? If you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.